Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of In Focus. Today we're joined by Steve Ayres, who is Fractional CTO of Logicality. Steve, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a privilege and a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, Steve. We'll start how we always start. In your opinion or in your mind, what's the most interesting or exciting thing about working in tech at the moment?
Sure. I think it would be easy here to say, AI and compute power and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to say that because I think a lot of other people would think that. But I think what particularly excites me at the moment, particularly as we'll come on to talk about the sort of roles that I do, is that there's an increasing momentum now, I think, for smaller businesses and teams to be able to pick up ideas and use tools and build services and solutions. The access to quality tech and to new tools is really allowing people to be innovative and competitive, really. I mean, some people might disagree with the competitive point because they might be up against the big giants, but for me, I think it's great and really exciting for a small company with a relatively small team to be able to say, hey, we've got an idea, let's go and do something about it. And I think that's increasingly the case, because all of the services and tools that we have access to, I think it's great, and it's really exciting, and it's something I very much enjoy getting involved in.
Great, and you're right. We will come on to it, but just on that point, it is great to see, and we see a lot of it certainly in my line of work as well. I think that the gap between being able to use technology to solve problems versus not has become a lot smaller. Previously, it used to be it's going to cost loads of money, loads of time, loads of people, loads of investment. So you either did that or you just didn't do it at all and kept it in Excel spreadsheets or whatever, managing things you were doing it. Whereas it's nice to see that there's sort of steps in the interim now as well, because over engineering has been a big thing in the past as well, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And I think critically, the thing that is becoming a little bit easier is this notion that it's always been possible for businesses to explore ideas and be innovative, but then to productionize something and get it either to production inside your own business or out into the wild as a product or a service is always been the difficult bit. And I think now, because as we all know, the access to scalable computing and all that kind of stuff, it's really blurring the lines there, and allowing people to get stuff out there, try stuff. I always often use the term, just throw mud at the wall and see what sticks, and that might seem a bit flippant from somebody who's in an advisory leadership role, but equally, I think it's really important to just try stuff, and I think that's what excites me, that people can do that these days. Less so, in larger enterprises, it's harder. But certainly in smaller setups, I think it's great.
Good. And we've known each other a short while now, Steve, so I'm familiar, but a lot of people listening won't be. So fill us in on a little bit of your, I suppose, background and your career to date.
Sure, yeah. So I've always been in tech for about 25 years now, something like that. And when I look back on it, I started at an early age. My dad was a big influence, and I was doing access databases when I was doing my GCSEs for companies that my mum worked for, and all that kind of entry level stuff, which is given me which is where it all started, I guess, when I look back. And I actually did environmental science at university and geophysics masters, and so it's always had a sort of angle on data and maths. But I actually went down that route. But then quickly after to uni, I applied for a tech role, and that was that really. A lot of my early career was in financial services, working in and around the Channel Islands, a bit in the city, and feeding into some of those, big companies that we all hear about, the Goldman Sachses and all of that kind of stuff. And that was a really interesting time, actually. That was probably sort of the 15 to 20 year ago bracket, when a lot of these companies were realizing that, the web is a thing, you know, and you can actually make money out of it. You can save money, you can be efficient, you know, and working in financial services, there was a real shift during that time from, you know, providing services and data and information on paper, you know, to putting it online. We did a lot of work in my early years around initially automating paper reporting, you know, so, you know, fact sheets for mutual funds and pensions and all of that kind of stuff. And then, of course, that then moved on to, right, okay, well, we don't need the paper anymore, and we can put it online. So that was my sort of early chapter, if you like. And that was great. But then I kind of fell into a couple of other industries. I always had an involvement with a company based in the textile industry, not so much at the fashion end, but at the textile manufacturing end. And I worked with them for several years, initially in Bradford and then in Leeds. I ended up as effectively their CTO, and helped them go through that transition as well. They're originally a publisher, publishing, you know, weekly, monthly, annual magazines and journals, and taking them, you know, from doing that to sort of an online information business powered by, you know, data and all of those good buzzwords that we like, and building up a subscription online service. And that, you know, I don't think there's anything unusual about that route. You know, a lot of people have taken that, you know, a lot of businesses have. So I did that for a lot of years, all the time, you know, keeping in touch with some of the things that I'd done in the past, and what that kind of leads on to where I am now. But I did have a little bit of a jump in between, or after the textile business, where I thought, right, I've done an awful lot of work with large enterprises and working and delivering into them, but I've never worked for one. So I worked for Morrison's supermarkets for a bit, where I kind of headed up their data and reporting side of things there, and that was great. That was, you know, I found it really interesting to be on the other side, if you like, of a lot of this, you know, and obviously they're a huge company, and it was really interesting to get to grips with how all of that kind of internal politics and all of that side of stuff works, as well as all the tech side of stuff. So I did that for a while, but then very quickly I realized that my heart really was in being both in leadership and in the tech side of things, and being able to blend the two. And that kind of leads on to where we are now. I started, after Morrison's, I started my own consultancy business. The intention always was to look at consultancy, to look at contracting, that kind of thing. But very quickly it became apparent that that there's this new kind of breed, if you like, of role coming out, which was this idea of fractional, fractional in general, but in my case, sort of CTO roles, and I now do that for 4 different businesses, you know, and that's, you know, what we're going to go on and talk about, obviously, in this episode, which is great. But that's really allowed me to blend my sort of desire to stay hands-on, but equally to be able to give some of my experience and thought to helping what very different businesses sort of go from where they are to scale, to develop product services, and also get access to sort of a CTO style experience and advice, without having to go the full hog and bring somebody in, you know, and I know we'll go on to speak about that. So yeah, so now basically I'm just good at juggling. That's pretty much what I do now, which is, you know, is great. And as we know, and you'll know more than anybody, today's tech job market is really driven by flexibility and opportunity in that kind of area. I think probably as recent as a couple or 3 years ago, probably the COVID, you know, pandemic did this, but, you know, these roles, certainly in the volume that they exist now, just didn't exist a few years ago. So you know, I've been, timing wise, I've been lucky.
Yeah, well, I mean, you make your own luck, don't you? I suppose is the other way to look at it. But yeah, I suppose, you know, digging into, and thank you for sort of giving people, because a lot of people still won't be aware of what a fractional CTO does. And traditional thinking would say, well, a CTO could be seen as, you know, one of the key positions, if not the key position in a technology business or a technology team in a business. Why wouldn't you have that person there full time? Or why don't you need that person there full time? So can you give us some insight, you know, from your experience on that perspective of, you know, what sorts of things you may do as a fractional CTO at different stages of different companies?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, it's, you know, I mean, you make a good point, and I think there is, you know, there's no doubt what you get to a certain size of business when, you know, clearly you're going to bring somebody in and they're going to fulfill that role, and they'll have a team of directors underneath them and so forth. But I think more now we're getting to the stage where, and it almost alludes to the point I made at the start around how there's smaller businesses now that are able to generate ideas and innovate and create products and services in-house using tech tools. But what they don't really have is the experience. They've got plenty of people that could perhaps do that, but they don't necessarily have the experience around how do you put it out into the market, how do you manage some of the challenges around recruiting, and how do you know, bring something together in a way that's, you know, scalable, and someone that's been there, done that kind of thing. But equally, they're probably not the size of business that can go out and say, right, well, I want to pluck somebody out there for this, you know, that's out there, and it's going to cost them a fair chunk of cash. But the other thing as well, again, as you'll know, is it's not easy to land these roles now. You know, if you're in the market for somebody to fulfill a CTO role, it's not easy to find that person. And actually, you can waste a lot of time trying to find the right person. Because classically, I think, you know, for a small business, sometimes they start with the CTO and sometimes they start with the idea and the CEO. And if you've done it the latter way, it's hard to bring it in. If it was somebody was originally there, then great. But I think what people are finding and businesses of a certain size is that they want that advice, they want that sounding board, but they don't need somebody to run the teams on a day-to-day basis necessarily. They're either self-managing and self-running, or they've got somebody that can do that kind of role there. So what they really want is someone to say, right, well, I can give you a certain amount of time, or we can, as we'll come and talk about, or we're looking for this outcome, and we want you to help us along that way. So I think that's the difference to a certain extent. And I mean, obviously, in a large business, a CTO doesn't necessarily get involved in the weeds of running teams anyway. But actually, you know, a fractional role, they're looking for the advice, they're looking for help to get to the outcome. They're not so interested necessarily in somebody that can, you know, day-to-day manage the team, you know, all that kind of stuff, because they've either got that in place, or the world is changing now anyway, and the day-to-day managing of a disparate team is quite different to an office-based team anyway. So yeah, it's undoubtedly new, and but fundamentally it's all about giving access to experience and knowledge to a business of a size and scale that they wouldn't have been able to get to before, really. And I think I read somewhere, and I really should dig this out because it's a good sales pitch from my point of view, but there's this kind of notion that actually in a working week you're kind of productive for like a day or a day and a half or something like that. So, you know, there's this kind of thought that, you know, when I'm working with different clients, I'm wholly in with them for a day, or as it happens, it will be spread across the week. But then, you know, it's very much a case of you're productive, you're thinking, you're making decisions, you're thinking about what's going to happen, and you're putting things in place. And then all of that kind of dead time that you might have around, you know, twiddling your thumbs and you know, a lot of good stuff can happen in that dead time. But at the same time, there is an awful lot of lax time in a general person's week, and it's all gone, you know, because, you know, you're measured on your outcomes, and, you know, you've agreed to a certain level of input, and from there you move on. So it's different. And what I've noticed, and you'll probably know as well, is that I think from somebody in my position has been thinking about it for a while, but now we're getting the other side of the coin, where actually people are thinking, oh, you know, potential, not employers, but potential clients are thinking this could work for us too, and that's happening more and more. And we're seeing more roles out there saying, fractional advertising, and fractional recruiting, which that certainly wasn't there 18 months ago, even if the roles might have been. So it's developing, sure.
Absolutely, and I think it sort of fits into this progressively more Netflix culture that we've all become in the, a company going through a certain stage of whatever their development is as a company might need a CTO for a period of time to get them from point A to point B, because they might have an idea and they might just want to build the base of it with the base of the team or something like that. A CTO whose specialism is recruiting and building teams, or one whose specialism might be, we're here, we're looking for investment, we need that CTO that knows, has that string to his bow. And I suppose you could almost carve out specialisms for yourself in a way where you are that profile of CTO, and
absolutely,
once that's happened, the company's not going to need it forever, so it sort of fits both ways.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's happened, and I mean, it's actually happened to me a couple of times where we've had that swap over. So I've done something with somebody, and then they've moved on to the next one, and then they've come back because they've said, all right, now we're looking at putting a product into market, or we're looking at integrating a system, or whatever it might be. And I think, you're right. I mean, my background has traditionally been in data and analytics and integration, and less so more in the technical side of technology, and less so in the sort of soft skill side of it, and the team building side of it. And they're very different things. They really are. There's very few people out there that are good at. Well, there's nobody that's good at everything, and there's very few people that are even good at sort of 80%, really. So you're right, and that's a key selling point for the client, really. It's we'll talk about the difference between sort of contracting and that kind of stuff, but it's giving them less commitment. Let's face it as well. Everybody likes full-time members of staff on the balance sheet can be good in some respects, but they can be a hindrance in other ways. So it's that kind of silent partnership, if you want to call it that.
And you mentioned it there. It's a good point to come on to as our next sort of discussion point, I suppose, in terms of the pitching of a fractional role versus a traditional full-time time and materials contract role. What are the key differentiators, would you say, and how, let's assume people listening to this may look at this career move down the line, how do you make sure you are pitching those as two very distinct things? Because you definitely don't want to get this bit blurred, do you?
Yeah, that's right. You don't want to, because I think, and I guess that there probably is a dictionary definition of fractional roles out there somewhere. I've no idea what it is, but in my mind, there's a lot of differences between the two, and you've got to get your pitch right. Yeah, I think when it comes to a fractional role, you're very much more saying, right, I'm gonna give you an outcome, and that might be slightly more ethereal around, I'm going to help guide your strategy and build your strategy over a period of time, or it might be very specific where you're saying, right, well, we've got a product here and we're trying to get it to market, and that's the end of it. Whereas and I think also, there's not been many sort of openings for contracting in that area anyway, in that kind of leadership style role. Contracting traditionally, you might disagree, but I think it's very much more on the technical side. If you're looking for developers, your engineers, you can go out and get them on contract, but to have somebody that's going to build the strategy, then that's a less contracty kind of role. But I think there are other differences as well. I mean, I feel very much. I know you do also when you're contracting, but I feel very much, or you can do when you're contracting, part of the teams for the businesses that I work with, and they treat me as an employee, So, and depending on the culture, of course, that can vary wildly with contracting. But ultimately, in the back of your mind, when you're contracting, you've always got this thought that there is a line in the sand, which is the end of your contract. Is it going to be extended? Am I going to go somewhere else? and I think also usually as well, when you're working for a contract, the employer will want you full time or close to full time. So the notion of mixing multiple contracts running in parallel is unusual. You might have two. You're pretty unlikely to have four, because finding 4 or 5, employees that want 1 day a week is unusual, whereas for a fractional role, that is what it is. So I think that they're some of the key sells. I can be part of your team. I can understand, what's going on, because in my mind, there is, although we spoke about there that you could come and go into a business. These are open-ended arrangements. They're not really agreements with a timescale on them. So it's in your interest to become immersed in the business culture and help it build and grow. And there might be, we can talk about how do you price it and that kind of thing, but there might well be equity at stake, and all of these kind of things as well, which is perhaps that's more a case of how, as a potential fractional recruiter or an employer, do you make it more interesting for the potential role filler. So there are a lot of differences, and it does feel like as long as you're upfront with the client that this is what you're doing, and I mean, I know that sounds obvious, but you don't want a situation, whereby ideally you don't want a situation whereby the phone's ringing and you're on site somewhere and they're not there. You don't want to put anyone's nose out, John. And it boils down to those sort of little things where you got to feel confident that you can pick up the phone and talk about another client or different business while you're with another one. So you've got to be really open from the outset. This is what we do. This is how I work. Does it fit with what you need? And be open and honest and flexible. And it really fits in with this whole notion as well of flexible working in general. In many ways it's an offshoot of that, really. People have said, well, if we can arrange where we work in a certain way, can't we change the thinking around our engagement between employee or client, and things. So I think as long as everybody's open and clear about what they're getting, and fundamentally, of course, the client is getting access to CTO style experience for cut price. That's really what it boils down to. And I think when you come on to pricing and think about that, it can be quite difficult, because when you start adding things up, you're thinking, oh, hang on a minute, I'm effectively putting myself out there at hundreds, 100 grand plus a year, and I'm into a real different world here, and depending on where you are in the country, is that value? But that's that you need to think differently, and you need to say, well, actually, that's not what the client is paying, is it? They're paying much reduced rate from that, and they're getting a lot of input and value from it. And I think if you think like that, then it becomes a little bit easier to balance it in your own mind.
Yeah. Would you say this is going to sound like a funny question, is it a harder role than having one job as a CTO? And the reason I ask that is because, so you made a really good point about the productivity of somebody working full time. But if you're, let's say, you're on four client sites, and make this dead simple just for my mind and maths, but one day a week, you work 4 days a week, but that's 4 days at 100%, because you don't have the dead time or the downtime. That's top level productivity. So is that difficult when you combine it with all of the context switching that must be going on, because you are juggling and managing 4 different clients at the same time?
Yeah, I think that it can work both ways. I mean, it can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes. There's no point pretending it can't be. And as you say there, some things like managing 4 or 5 email inboxes at once is a challenge. It does feel busy, but I think a lot of people in a lot of roles, tech or otherwise, feel busy all the time anyway. That doesn't necessarily mean they're always productive, but they feel busy. I think there's not many people, certainly in tech, and I'm only saying that because that's where my experience lies, but there's not many people that would say, "Oh, I'm quiet. I don't do a lot of work." I think they would all say, "Oh, it's mad. We're doing this and we're spinning this plate." So it's only really an extension of that. I think you do need to be. I think you need to be flexible to the extent of when you're considering the initial engagement with the client, you need to be able to say to them, this is the sort of service I'm offering, but I can't always promise that I'll be with you on a Monday morning, because, but what I can promise you is, we'll do some good stuff together. We'll work through, and you will get good value at the end of it. And I think clients are now more prepared to take that approach than they were previously. But yeah, it is busy. But that's a good thing. The other thing I think is really important to get across to clients in that sense is, hang on a minute, you might only be getting a limited time. And I try not to talk about, oh, you get a day a week, or you get 9 hours or 12 hours or whatever it is, because week to week that varies, and all that kind of thing. I think it's more about, I'll give you this level of commitment, and we'll have these outcomes. I'll fill this role for you, and let's have quite often I say, let's do it for 3 months and then see where we're at, or whatever it might be. But what's really important to get across to the clients is that you're getting potentially cross sector, cross industry experience going on here all at once. So there's an awful lot of borrowing of knowledge and ideas that goes across between these. I think you do. I've been lucky in that I've not had any conflicts of interest or anything like that, and I think you have to be very aware of that. I think you do have to be prepared to say, if you got into that situation, you'd have to be prepared to say, like, I can't take this role, or if the new one was better, and you have to get rid of the old one. But you got to be realistic about it. You can't work for two competitors. You just can't do that. But the ability to move ideas between clients is great, and I do an awful lot of that. We tried it over there. It worked really well. Yeah, sure, you can't always assume that the same thing will work again. That's a bad idea. But at the same time, we can try it over here with some experience and knowledge, maybe improve it. And then the improvements that you've made here, you go back over there. And, it's a really great way of speeding up innovation, really, within the businesses, because you've just tried it. You've just done it. It's not, oh, I did it 3 years ago at my last employer. It's, we tried it the other day. The dev team thought this was their feedback, all that kind of stuff. So that's a key point as well. You get an awful lot of experience and cross-pollination of ideas.
Yeah. And do you find yourself saying no a lot? Because one of the sort of things that springs to mind is, how do you make sure that you don't overload yourself?
Yeah. I think I say no more than I used to in a role, but actually I'm not sure that that's really as a result of being fractional in roles. I think it's as a result of experience in general. I think 5 years into my career, so 20 odd years ago, I would just say yes to everything, and I don't necessarily, that's not a great thing, but also I do try to be a yes person in general. And I think people like that, but equally, it's just not sustaining, if you keep doing that forever, because 10 years down the line, you'll just be swamped. So I'm not sure that, I try not to say no in the engagements that I'm already involved with. But it is a case of, if we're having for example, if we're having a meeting about a potential product development or a potential idea that people are interested in tech and want tech to push forward, it's about being realistic with the client there and saying, well, that's perhaps a possibility. If you've got an in-house team that's going to do that, then that's great. But if you haven't, I'm not doing it. I'm not personally doing it. You've got to resource it if you want to do that. But I'm not sure that that's that different to a normal conversation anyway. But I think where I've kind of found my own personal niche is that ability, in a way, to actually say, in some of those instances, that I can actually do that, and I like to be in a position where I can say, we're doing the leadership bit, but we're also doing some of the technical bit, and I think there's a sort of incorrect, in my mind, notion anyway, that as you move through the tiers of or whatever you want to call it, tier hierarchy, whatever, of the leadership sort of chain, that you should be relinquishing doing stuff. And maybe in larger organizations you have to do that. Okay, sure. But when you're working with small, medium businesses, I think I think that's wrong. I think you should keep your hand in. I think you should get involved. I think you should sit with developers and see what's going on and do stuff. And I mean, but that's partly because that's what I like doing as well. And that's another great thing for me personally about all of these arrangements, is being able to do that. Literally, as we were just saying there, I can say, oh, we did this over there. Let's get down and and let's do it over here. So I mean, no one likes to hear no, but I think it's not. You just have to be realistic, with your own time, but also with the capabilities of whatever business you're working with at the time.
Yeah, sure. And if let's say, for example, somebody approached you today, Steve, and said, look, we've got this really great piece of work that you're a shoe-in for. It's right in your wheelhouse. It's going to be maybe 3 months worth of commitment, X amount of time. Do you keep a constant check of how much in the future your current clients are going to need you before sort of agreeing to something like that? Or do you sort of have a way of saying, like, well, actually, can I include this piece of work, or actually, are they going to need me a bit more? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's all about, again, it's kind of being open and honest with the clients that either you've got or the potential one that's just come in. But I mean, I think you'll naturally know whether your current commitments are tailing off, or whether they're increasing, or whether they're reaching a point where there might be a pause. And actually, that is possibly a way of accommodating that kind of scenario, where you look at your current situation or your current clients and say, well, would these guys actually benefit from a pause in my engagement for a while, or a reduction in it, so that I couldn't consume that piece of work there. But ultimately, of course, if you're already doing a lot of work and if your book is full, then you have to be prepared to either or make a tough decision with your existing clients, or just say, sorry, no, thank you very much. But that, in some respects, that's kind of like, if you're, no matter how big your business is, it can only consume a finite amount of work. And when I've worked with some of these bigger organizations that have enormous technology teams, they've still got that same challenge. They've still got all the different business units around the organization coming to them and saying, we would like this, and this. Unfortunately, it's usually a case of, well, which ones are paying and which ones aren't. But and how much they pay. But it's still the same challenge. It's like, how do you manage your resource, and whether that's one person or 1,000 or 10,000, then I think it's the same challenge. It is hard though. You never want to say no. And you introduced me as working for Logicality. That's fundamentally my umbrella company, if you like, for managing, or the conduit for these fractional roles. But equally, maybe one day I'd like to grow that business. So maybe there's a notion somewhere along the line that I would say, okay, well, is there somebody else out there like me? Could we get together? Can we merge? Can I employ them? Can we do something together? But then, of course, the dynamic changes. At which point do you then move from being fulfilling fractional roles to just being a regular business? But I think I could see, and that's a really interesting question, actually. Or thought around how does how do you evolve? You know, your career, your business, whatever it is that you're doing, how does that evolve with fractional roles? And if I'm honest, I don't know the answer. You know, I'm not sure whether everybody does, you know, or anybody does necessarily. I could see myself working with somebody who's in a very similar role, and we might cross-pollinate roles, you know. But then if that duo became 3 or 4 or 5, you're really just a business then, and you're doing something different. Nothing wrong with that, but you just have to accept the fact that that's the way it went. And as long as you're comfortable with it, great. But if you don't want to lose that, you have to be aware that you're going to have to say no, because you're only one person. You know?
Yeah, 100%. And I suppose this brings us on to a final large part of the equation, which is pricing, because it's probably priced in a way that people have never thought of before, because it's on outcomes, as opposed to, you know, an hourly or a daily or a salary or anything like that. But then also, you know, everyone will be keen to, I'm guessing it gets easier with experience, but when you're first starting out in this type of world, you don't want to undersell yourself, but then you also don't necessarily know what too high is as well. So talk us through, I suppose, your journey and your experience with pricing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is probably the area that I certainly struggle with most, and I'm sure others in the same situation do too, or have done. I mean, I was kind of lucky when I left my last full-time role, and that I had an idea that there might be a couple of people out there that would be interested in my involvement, and I would probably encourage anybody making that same move to have that as well. Not necessarily shoe-ins, and they might say no, and it might not work out. But you need somebody to approach, I think, just from the sense of practicing, you know, and trying out things like pricing. And I think, you know, pricing's hard because naturally, you know, a potential client will be saying, right, well, what's your hourly rate? What's your day rate? You know, and why wouldn't they ask that? You know, and how many days are we going to get a week? And can you do a Monday and a Tuesday? And it's like, I think at that point, or I've tried to steer away from all of that. You know, it's very much a case of, okay, you've got a need for somebody. You don't want to pay 150 grand a year for somebody to fulfill that role, either because you don't think it's necessary, you've not got the budget, whatever it might be. So I can fulfill some of that role, or I can fulfill that role on a effectively a part-time basis, you know. And so you get all of the benefits, or a lot of the benefits, without the hassle of, you know, cost of employment for another employer and all of those kind of things. So then it's like, well, how do you price it? And I think you have to look at the business individually that you're talking to. You know, what is their, you know, how big are they? What sort of roles do they have? You won't have access to the information around what their salaries are necessarily, but you could have a reasonable guess at what they might be. And you've got to go in at a sensible level. You know, but I do think it's very much a case of saying, you know, I can fulfill the role, or I can help you out. It's going to cost you X amount a month. I think that's the starting point. As you say, it's going to cost you X amount a month, you know. And if you're really pushed, people might say, well, how much time do I get for that? And you can say, well, you know, on average, it might be 12 hours a week, but that is an average, you know, and we all know what an average is. So, you know, it goes up and down. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to provide you with a timesheet. I'm not going to provide you with any of that kind of stuff that's all in the contracting world. If you want to do that, then it's my personal choice, but I'm not interested in that. You know, it's very much a case of, if at any point you're not happy with what we're doing here, then let's talk, you know, and the same the other way as well. So I think, you know, there's probably no real harm in the back of your mind thinking about what it is that you want financially, you know, and thinking, how much do you think you're worth on an hourly or daily basis? But you really don't want to structure the arrangement like that, because otherwise you're limited to 5 times day rate, whatever that day rate is, and that is, you know, that's, you don't want to be limited in anything, you know. So I think, you know, I think it's a good approach, and you know, it won't work for every potential client, I don't think, but equally, I think particularly smaller businesses who find it easier to justify. And I should say, by smaller businesses, I mean, I'm talking here, everyone's definition of smaller business is different. But let's say, for example, 250, 300 employees, whatever it is, that kind of region, that they've got a lot more flexibility usually. They're not usually public. They don't usually have to justify their spending quite the same way as a large organization might have to, and might have to go down to the hourly sort of daily approach. So I think it's better to say, I've got 4 arrangements. I provide a service. I charge you this much a month. You do have to be, I think you have to be realistic. If you go on holiday for 2 weeks, you're going to have to adjust your monthly rate. You can't just disappear and do nothing, And of course, that's subtly different from, it is different from employment. You're not building holiday up and stuff, but it's all about talking outcomes, and just making sure you're happy with the money. It's like you probably made this move in the first place to become more flexible, more financially flexible, as well as physically flexible. So you don't tie yourself up in a situation where you 6 months down the line or 12 months down the line, you think, well, actually, I started this because of all of these good reasons, because of all of these principles, and I broke all of them within the first month when I did. So you got to. I think you've got to be prepared. Just like when you start any business, you've got to be prepared to filter out opportunities. And as we were just saying there, if somebody comes back hard and fast and says, we work on an hourly basis and I need you to fill in this timesheet, and I mean, apart from the fact that filling in a timesheet takes time, and if you're only on a 12-hour week, then that's valuable time. I mean, all of those things that go with traditionally managing that kind of approach are not great things, really, when you're on a limited time. So openness and honesty, but talk about outcomes. Make sure you're happy. Make sure that obviously the client's happy, and don't get hung up on the fact that if you factor it out in your own head, it comes out at a significant annual investment. Because if they want somebody annually full time, then they'll go and get them. Or they should go and get them. They're doing this because they want your arrangement. So don't lose sight of that. I think that's important.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, as you say, if the outcomes are there and everyone believes that's what we want to achieve, and it's going to cost them X, then nobody in theory really, in a perfect world, should be bothered about how much time you're going to spend on it or not. It's like, that's what and that's what you'll get paid.
I mean, that's born out of the very much more outcome-driven talent and employment world that we're in now. There's an awful lot of stuff out there, isn't there? That you should be measuring outcomes and not inputs, and all of that kind of stuff. And obviously, I'm fully bought into that. It's like if you price something accordingly, whether it be a product or a business or whatever it is, make sure you're getting value for that price. But as you said, what does it matter? The outcome's the outcome.
Yeah, I agree. And we touched on it a little bit when you mentioned about making the transition into your first fractional role, like try and have a couple of warm places to go to that may turn into something. They may do, they may not, but you can get your practice in. What other, I suppose, advice would you have for somebody doing this for the first time? Because the switch is a big one, to go from 100, 150, 200,000 salary plus benefits plus package and all the rest of it, C-level role, to self-employed, in essence, where you may be only forecasting 3 months at a time.
I mean, it is it is a big jump, and it won't suit everybody. If people are really comfortable in that world, then don't change something. Don't fix it if it ain't broke. Kind of thing. But equally, if people feel that they want to try something different, then I think it can really work. And I think the advice is have some warm leads that you can approach. But you are making a change, and you're doing it because you've got certain drivers. Maybe it's more flexibility in your daily life. I want to be able to walk the kids to school, whatever it is, that kind of important stuff. So all of that has a value as well. So, if when you add up your initial, you're not going to go from, or you're very unlikely to go from 150 grand a year into a fractional setup that's paying you 200 within a month. That's not going to happen, So you've got to be, you've got to be in a financial position to manage a period of reduced income, and you've got to accept that, and you've got to give value to all of the benefits that you made the change for in the first place. But equally, if you do, follow those rules of not getting bound by time and value per unit, then you can, or in my experience anyway, you can build up into a situation where you are bringing in more revenue than you were, and then the other beautiful thing about it as well, of course, is that if you do engage with somebody, or a client, and 3 months down the line you personally don't like it for whatever reason, then you can make a change without leaving your job, which is what your choice is if you're in a full-time role. So you can make choices around who you work with, what, maybe you don't like the environment, you don't like the ethics, whatever it is that's driving you out of that engagement. You can make that choice and you can look for something different. So yeah, I think overall my advice there is have a go at it. Don't get hung up on yourself. You are a valuable commodity to all sorts of different businesses, or a valuable, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to be 200 grand in 2 weeks. That don't lose any sleep over it, and it's not forever. Try it. 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line, you don't like it, you've not got the work, whatever, you've got that CTO experience that you had in the big company, so go back there, not necessarily to that one, but to go back into that world. As we said earlier on, these roles are not easy to find, to fill, sorry. So, someone with a good experience should be able to find something again, certainly in the market today anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. 100% agree. And 2 final questions, Steve, to finish it off. One that is, you've obviously been doing fractional for a little while. You've got multiple engagements on the go. We've talked about a lot in this episode. What would you say is your favorite thing about being a fractional CTO?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. And I think this is where you get the opportunity to take stock around what it is that you did it for in the first place. So I think, there's a number of different things, but I think you grow personally, both, personally and, in terms of work. I think you grow faster. You get a lot more, you spread across a lot more different engagements, and you get exposure to a lot more variety of teams and so forth. I think you can make a bigger difference. That's probably the big one for me. I think, it's so valuable having exposure to multiple setups and being able to cross-pollinate that knowledge, that it's really enjoyable to be able to walk into a meeting and say, why don't we try this? I think it's a good idea. And everyone turn around and go, yeah, that's a really good idea. And actually all you've done is regurgitate something that you heard a couple of days ago. So, flexibility and I think the value that you can add is greater. And I really enjoy that. Maybe it'll change, but right now I'm in a happy place with it. And that's great.
Good. And you're right as well, because the value you can add, the key differentiator is the value is, and the experience is current, isn't it? Yeah. So, I have these conversations all day long with C-level people all the way down to, junior developers and entry-level people. It's, where have you done that before? And it's always historic, so we did this 6 months ago, we did this a year ago, and that's how it went then. But isn't it so much better to have that information from 6 days ago?
So valuable. And also the flip as well is of being able to say, oh, we tried this and it worked really well. It's really good being able to say, hang on a minute, we tried that, and for these good reasons it didn't work at all. And let's just save our time, time and effort. That's really, really valuable, as you say. And people love it, because it's a shortcut, isn't it? It's what it is.
Yeah. And final question from me, Steve. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received that you'd like to share with our listeners and viewers today?
Well, it's probably a couple. I'm not sure it's particularly related to fractional, but I do recall an experience probably 20 years ago. when I arranged to meet somebody in the city in London, a guy that I still respect a lot, and we were going for a drink, and I kind of came into the bar, sat down, and he said, "Oh, how's your day been?" And I sort of went, "Oh, it's been awful. I've been doing emails, I've been phone calls, and been struggling to do all this and that." And he just looked at me and went, "All right, so you've just been doing your job then?" I was like, "Oh yeah, actually I have," and when I actually think about what, whether he really meant it or not, I'm not sure. But what I took from it was that we're all busy. Get over yourself. You're not any more important than anybody else. And we all have good and bad days. And I always say it that, you never know, what kind of a day somebody's having when you walk up and start speaking with them. So yeah, no, whether it's advice or not, it was really a case of, just get over yourself. You know more, better or worse than anybody else. And that said, we all know that when someone's having a bad day, have a reach out and give them a hand, because it's really important in this day and age. But yeah. And I think the other piece of advice I'd really recently, actually, I won't name names, but it was at one of your events, and afterwards we were walking back with this particular person that I've met for the first time. He's a few years older than me, and we were talking about my family, and it's a real cliche, but he just said, make sure make sure you're there for your daughter. Make sure you spend time with her when she's growing up. And just because of who he was and the way he said it, it really resonated with me. And it's said 1,000 times, but every now and again people actually listen to it, and I think it's important. It's important. So there is life outside work. As you said, it can be busy fractional stuff. It can be very busy. You can fall into the bad habits of Saturday, Sunday at the computer. So every now and again, just take stock and walk away from it, because it's really important.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve, and thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And I'll share links to everything we've spoke about. If you're okay with it, I'll get your LinkedIn profile up there as well, so people can reach out directly.
Well, thanks for having me. Much appreciated. It's been great, and look forward to hooking up again in the future and further engagements. It's all good.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. Have a good one.
Cheers. Bye-bye.